Have you ever prayed with all your heart and heard nothing back? Have you ever cried out to God in the middle of the night, asking for help, asking for direction, asking for relief, and all you felt was silence? No sign, no answer, no visible movement, just silence. There are moments in every believer's life where God feels quiet, where heaven feels still, where prayers seem to echo back without response, and in those moments, questions begin to rise in the human heart. Did God hear me? Is He ignoring me? Did I do something wrong? Why is nothing changing? Silence can be one of the most difficult spiritual experiences to endure, because when God speaks, we feel guided. When He moves, we feel reassured. But when He is silent, uncertainty tries to take over. Yet what many believers do not understand is this: God's silence does not mean God's absence. Just because He is quiet does not mean He is inactive. Just because you cannot see movement does not mean nothing is happening. In fact, some of God's greatest works happen in seasons where He appears the most silent. Silence is often the environment where divine preparation takes place. There are times when God works behind the scenes, arranging outcomes, aligning people, opening unseen doors, and dismantling obstacles you may never even know existed. But because this work happens outside human visibility, it feels like nothing is happening at all. Think about a seed planted in the ground. The moment it is buried, it disappears from sight. If you judged by visibility alone, you would assume it is lifeless. But beneath the soil, transformation is happening, roots are forming, structure is developing, growth is preparing to emerge. Silence does not mean inactivity, it often means development. God works the same way in many seasons of our lives. He allows moments where we cannot see what He is doing because He is building foundations deep enough to sustain what He is about to release. If He answered instantly every time, many of us would receive outcomes we are not yet prepared to handle. So silence becomes preparation. There are also seasons where God's silence is protection. You may be praying for doors to open that God knows would harm you if they open now. You may be asking for relationships, opportunities, or outcomes that look good from your perspective but carry unseen consequences. God sees beyond timelines, He sees outcomes. So sometimes His silence is not rejection, it is preservation. He is shielding you from what you cannot yet see. He is delaying what could damage you. He is rerouting your path toward something better than what you requested. But because the answer is not immediate, it feels like abandonment. Another dimension of divine silence is spiritual growth. There are seasons where God reduces external reassurance so internal faith can develop. When He speaks constantly, faith leans on His voice. But when He becomes quiet, faith learns to stand on trust. Trust matures in silence. Anyone can believe when miracles are visible. Anyone can trust when answers are instant. But believing when God feels quiet builds deeper spiritual strength than visible intervention ever could. Silence stretches faith. It asks you to keep praying when answers delay, to keep trusting when outcomes stall, to keep believing when emotions fluctuate. And through that stretching, your faith stabilizes beyond feelings. There is also a relational depth formed in silence. When communication is constant, dependence can become shallow, but when moments of quietness enter, pursuit increases. You begin to seek God not just for answers, but for presence. You learn to value Him beyond what He gives. Silence refines motives. It reveals whether you love God for who He is or only for what He does. And as this refinement happens, your relationship with Him deepens beyond transactional faith into genuine communion. Many of the strongest believers you will ever meet were shaped in silent seasons. Not because God abandoned them, but because He was building them, strengthening endurance, stabilizing identity, preparing them for assignments that required deeper roots than visible seasons could produce. Silence is not spiritual emptiness, it is spiritual construction. And as we continue deeper into this teaching, you will begin to understand why God allows silent seasons, what He accomplishes during them, and how to remain strong when heaven feels quiet. Because silence is never the end of the story. It is often the place where the story is being written behind the scenes. There is something deeply unsettling about praying and not receiving an immediate response. It challenges your patience, it tests your faith, it stretches your emotions in ways visible trials sometimes do not. Because when opposition is visible, you know what you are facing. But when God is silent, you are left navigating uncertainty. And uncertainty is uncomfortable for the human heart. Many believers begin strong in faith when they pray. They feel hope rise as they speak to God. They believe something will move quickly. But when days pass, then weeks, then sometimes even longer, and nothing changes, discouragement quietly begins to grow. They don't always stop believing in God, but they start questioning whether God is responding to them. Yet divine silence is never random. God does not withdraw His voice without purpose. There are spiritual reasons behind seasons where He appears quiet, and understanding these reasons helps stabilize your faith while you wait. One major reason God allows silence is because He is working on factors you cannot see. Many prayers involve more than just you. They involve people, timing, environments, and outcomes that must align correctly. If God answered instantly, the result might be incomplete, unstable, or even harmful long-term. God does not only answer prayers, He orchestrates outcomes. He arranges details, He prepares hearts, He positions opportunities, He removes unseen obstacles, He aligns circumstances in ways human planning could never accomplish. But orchestration takes time. And while that orchestration unfolds, heaven may appear silent, not because nothing is happening, but because everything is being arranged beneath the surface. Another reason for divine silence is preparation of character. There are blessings that require spiritual maturity to sustain. Influence requires humility. Expansion requires discipline. Visibility requires stability. And if these inner structures are not built first, the blessing itself could damage the person receiving it. So before God releases what you are asking for, He often prepares who you are becoming. Silence becomes the training ground. In silent seasons, patience develops, pride is reduced, dependence on God increases, motives are refined, endurance strengthens. And these inner developments matter just as much as the external answer. Because God is not only interested in giving you things, He is interested in shaping you. There is also the dimension of testing faith. Not testing to cause failure, but testing to produce strength. Faith that has never been stretched remains shallow, but faith that survives silence becomes unshakable. When you continue trusting God without visible reassurance, your belief system stabilizes beyond emotions. You begin to trust who God is, not just what He does. This kind of faith cannot be manufactured in visible miracle seasons. It is forged in silent ones. Another hidden purpose behind divine silence is redirection. Sometimes you are praying for one outcome while God is guiding you toward a different one. But instead of immediate correction, He allows silence so you can gradually detach from what you thought you needed. If He spoke instantly, you might resist. But silence creates space for reflection, for spiritual sensitivity, for gradual alignment. You begin to sense inner shifts, new desires form, old attachments weaken, and eventually you realize God was leading you somewhere better than what you originally requested. Silence can be divine navigation. There are also seasons where silence deepens intimacy. When God answers quickly, the focus often remains on the answer, but when He is silent, the focus shifts to His presence. You begin seeking Him more, not just seeking outcomes. You pray longer, you listen deeper, you hunger more. Relationship grows beyond requests into communion. Because true intimacy is not built only in conversation, it is built in sustained closeness, even in quietness. Many believers discover God's presence most deeply in seasons where His voice felt distant, not because He was absent, but because they pursued Him more intentionally. Silence sharpened their spiritual awareness. Another reality believers must understand is that divine silence never cancels divine faithfulness. God's quietness does not mean He has forgotten you. It does not mean He is indifferent. It does not mean He is inactive. His track record throughout Scripture and history proves that His faithfulness remains constant even when His voice is temporarily quiet. He sees, He knows, He remembers, He works. And often, when the silent season ends, the outcome reveals that God was doing far more than you imagined. Because while you were waiting, He was building. While you were questioning, He was arranging. While you felt alone, He was working behind the veil of visibility. As we move into the next part, we will explore how to remain spiritually strong during silent seasons, how to pray, how to trust, how to guard your heart when answers delay, and how to avoid the traps that silence can create in your mind. Because silence is not meant to weaken you, it is meant to deepen you. When you find yourself in a season where God feels silent, the greatest battle you face is not always external, it is internal. Because silence has a way of speaking to your mind even when God is not speaking audibly to your ears. Thoughts begin to form, questions begin to echo, doubts try to surface quietly. And if you are not spiritually grounded, those inner voices can weaken your faith more than any visible trial ever could. This is why learning how to remain strong during silent seasons is critical. Because silence is not just something you endure, it is something you must navigate wisely. One of the first things you must guard in silent seasons is your perception of God. When answers delay, the enemy often tries to distort how you view God's character. He whispers things like, "God has forgotten you. He answers others, but not you. You must have done something wrong. He is distant from your situation." But these thoughts are not truth. They are emotional reactions to temporary quietness. God's silence never cancels His nature. He is still faithful when quiet, still loving when quiet, still attentive when quiet, still working when quiet. If you allow silence to rewrite your perception of God, your faith will weaken unnecessarily. So instead of interpreting silence as abandonment, you must interpret it as hidden activity. Another key to surviving silent seasons is consistency in prayer. Many believers reduce prayer when God feels quiet. They assume, if He is not speaking, why continue? But silence is not the time to withdraw, it is the time to stay anchored. Prayer in silent seasons shifts from seeking answers to sustaining connection. You may not feel emotional intensity every time you pray. You may not sense immediate reassurance, but consistency keeps your heart aligned even when your emotions fluctuate. Because prayer is not sustained by feelings, it is sustained by conviction. You continue praying not because you feel something, but because you trust someone. Worship also becomes powerful during silent seasons. Worship redirects focus from problems to God's nature. It reminds your spirit of who He is beyond what you are currently experiencing. It stabilizes your emotions and restores perspective. When you worship in silence, you are declaring that God is worthy even when you do not understand your season. And that declaration strengthens your inner life. Another important discipline in silent seasons is guarding your thoughts. Silence creates mental space, and if that space is not filled with truth, it will be filled with fear. Your mind will begin creating worst-case scenarios. You will assume delays mean denial. You will interpret stillness as loss. But not every delay is denial. You must intentionally anchor your thoughts in God's promises, not your temporary perceptions. Reflect on past faithfulness. Remember previous breakthroughs. Recall moments where God moved when it seemed too late. Memory strengthens faith when present evidence is limited. There is also power in spiritual patience. Patience is not passive waiting, it is active trust. It is remaining steady while outcomes develop. It is refusing to panic while God prepares. It is resting internally even when circumstances remain unresolved. Patience protects your peace during silence. Impatience creates anxiety, fear, and rushed decisions, but patience allows God's process to unfold without interference. Another vital key is resisting comparison. During silent seasons, it is easy to look at others and feel overlooked. You see their breakthroughs, their testimonies, their answered prayers, and you wonder why your season feels different. But comparison weakens faith. God's timing is individualized. His dealings are personal. What He is doing in your life cannot be measured by what He is doing in someone else. Silence in your life does not mean absence of favor. It may mean depth of preparation. You must trust that your process is tailored specifically to your destiny. There is also strength found in remaining spiritually connected to God's Word. Scripture becomes anchor when emotions feel unstable. It reminds you that silent seasons are not new. Many before you walked through them and witnessed God's faithfulness on the other side. The Word stabilizes what silence tries to shake. And as you remain grounded in prayer, worship, patience, and truth, something begins to happen internally. You grow stronger. You become less dependent on emotional reassurance and more rooted in spiritual conviction. Your faith matures beyond feelings. Your trust stabilizes beyond visible evidence. And when the silent season eventually breaks, because it always does, you emerge deeper, steadier, and spiritually fortified in ways visible miracle seasons alone could never produce. In the final part, we will step into what happens when God's silence ends, how breakthroughs unfold, how preparation reveals its purpose, and how silent seasons often produce outcomes greater than what you originally prayed for. Because silence is never wasted, it is invested. There comes a moment when the silent season ends. It does not always end loudly. Sometimes it ends gradually. Sometimes doors begin to open quietly. Sometimes clarity replaces confusion. Sometimes peace settles before circumstances even change. But one way or another, the silence breaks. And when it does, you begin to realize that God was never inactive. You start seeing connections that did not make sense before. You notice how certain delays protected you. You recognize how certain closed doors redirected you. You understand how certain waiting periods prepared you internally. And suddenly, what once felt like abandonment begins to look like orchestration. Because while you were waiting, God was working. Many times, the outcome that emerges after a silent season is greater than what you originally prayed for, not because God ignored your request, but because He expanded it, He refined it, He aligned it with a higher purpose than you could see at the time. Silence often precedes enlargement. It is the space where God builds capacity before releasing expansion. Because if expansion came without preparation, it could overwhelm rather than bless you. So when the answer finally comes, you are not the same person who first prayed the prayer. You are stronger, wiser, more patient, more discerning, more spiritually stable. The silence did not delay you, it developed you. And this development matters because breakthroughs are not only about receiving outcomes, they are about sustaining them. What God releases after silent seasons is often weightier, more influential, and more purpose-connected than what you initially imagined. Another thing that becomes clear when silence ends is God's timing. You begin to see that if the answer had come earlier, certain details would have been incomplete, certain people would not have been ready, certain opportunities would not have aligned, certain protections would not have been in place. God's timing is not slow, it is precise. He moves when outcomes are fully prepared, not when emotions are most impatient. And when you look back, you realize that what felt like delay was actually synchronization. Everything aligned at the right moment. There is also a deeper intimacy formed after silent seasons. When God begins speaking again, guiding again, revealing again, you appreciate His voice differently. You value His presence more deeply. You no longer take His nearness for granted because you remember what it felt like when He was quiet. Silence teaches appreciation. It teaches you to treasure His guidance, His reassurance, His direction. It deepens gratitude in ways constant visibility never could. And even more importantly, silent seasons teach you endurance for future assignments. Because life will have multiple seasons, visible ones and silent ones. But once you survive one silent season, you carry confidence into the next. You know that silence is temporary. You know that God is still working. You know that outcomes are still forming. Your faith becomes resilient. You stop panicking when God is quiet because experience has taught you that His silence carries purpose. This is the maturity silent seasons produce. You no longer measure God's faithfulness by how loud His voice is. You measure it by His unchanging character. You trust Him even when you cannot trace Him. And that level of trust becomes spiritual strength few people ever develop. So if you are in a silent season right now, this is what you must remember. Nothing about your situation has caught God by surprise. Nothing about your delay is accidental. Nothing about your waiting is wasted. He is working behind what you cannot see. He is aligning what you cannot arrange. He is preparing what you cannot yet handle. He is protecting what you do not yet recognize. He is building what will soon become visible. Silence is not the absence of God, it is often the concealment of His activity. And when the season shifts, you will see evidence that He was present the entire time. As we close this teaching, let this truth anchor your heart. When God is silent, He is not distant. When He is quiet, He is not inactive. When answers delay, they are not denied. He is still King, still faithful, still working. If this message has strengthened your faith, encouraged your heart, or helped you understand your silent season differently, take a moment to support the channel. Like this message, share it with someone who may be walking through a quiet season, leave a comment about what spoke to you most, and subscribe so you don't miss the next teaching that will continue building your spiritual life. And always remember, even in silence, God is working.